Good afternoon, good morning for some people still, depending on where you are. Good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair for Streaming Media Connect. Welcome to another virtual streaming media event. We're going to be having a real world streaming media event, knock on wood, and anything else you can find in Boston in May 24th and 25th for Streaming Media East. And on May 23rd, we'll be having workshops and the Content Delivery Summit. So you can go to streamingmedia.com/East and find out more. Registration's open now, and the programs for both of those events will be up soon. But in the meantime, we've got a full week of panels and a workshop on Friday called The Best Streaming Gear and How to Use It. If you're not signed up for the whole week, you can still sign up for anything you want. And of course, all of the sessions this week will be available on demand later on. Just for being here, you're entered into a random drawing for an Amazon gift card, and I'll announce the winner at the end of the hour, and the winner will receive an email next week with information on how to cash that in. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsors, Bird Dog and Harmonic, and we have a video message from each of them right now. And I'd also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Zixi. Zixi's Eric Bolton will be joining us in just a few minutes. But before he joins us, our moderator needs to join us, Nadine Krefitz from Reality Software and contributing editor to Streaming Media. Hey, Nadine, how are you?
Good, Eric. How about you?
Excellent. You're all settled into your new digs in Northern California.
I am.
Excellent.
And not only that, I'm actually handing out chocolate this Valentine's Day to our panel and to everyone in the audience.
Outstanding. You all know where to collect it, right?
Yeah. So visit me at NAB and I'll hand you the chocolate.
We'll hold you to that.
Okay. Excellent.
All right.
Cool.
You take it away and bring on our panelists.
Okay. So we've got a great panel today, and we're going to be talking about AI and ML and the workflow. Michael from Discovery, why don't you turn on your camera? We got Michael. We have Ethan from IBM. And last but not least, Eric from Zixi, who is our sponsor for today. Great. Very nice. So earlier on, we were talking about music and AI and a bunch of other things. But right now, we've done this panel a while ago on machine learning and AI. And so this is kind of an update on it. One of the things I think about is this is almost just the next step in programming and development, just because it takes a lot of the things that are current and incorporates them. However, we won't just say that people will go and ask for AI and ML. People ask for certain things. So we're going to talk a little bit about what types of things they ask for and where AI and ML play. Michael, let's start off with you. Now, we have the description for, what AI and ML is, but where are you using it?
We use it through the whole pipeline in some way. It's the majority of our usage is what I would call on the ingest side to the whole cables, or the discovery system, I should say. And we do it for validation on we'll call it timing, segment timings for stuff that comes in the door. We do transcription type work. We do we just did some work about we'll call it celebrity matching, We're looking at using it for, I guess this is technically not AI for translation, but you get into a space of tone when it comes to translation to other languages and stuff. But we use a lot of it there. We've just started to look at it for, I'm going to call it scheduling, although as I've said to other people, if we can nail the scheduling thing, we're golden. Like, we know a show is going to be successful before it's successful. We're going to be really rich at that point. So we'll see where that goes. That has some more to do with, we'll call it the inside the Discovery enterprise of how we get content around the world.
Okay. Now, there are so many different ways that you said you're using it. Now, Ethan kind of narrows it down a little bit.
Probably.
We're going to talk in great depth about this, but Ethan and I were on this panel a couple of years ago, and at that point, nobody said they were using it anywhere. At least they wouldn't admit it for some reason. Ethan, where are you using it now?
So we use it a lot in terms of, so I work for IBM Watson Advertising and Weather. So on the weather side of things, we use it a lot to drive specific pieces of weather information to users. And the best example of that really is that, I suffer from allergies year round, and I really almost don't care about the temperature. I don't care whether it's raining or not. I just really want to know what the pollen count is going to be that day, and if I need to double down on my medication or not. And our AI is able to actually kind of get that information to the top for me. So when I go into a weather experience, I can kind of see that. On the ad side of the house, we do a lot with targeting, and it's great, right? Because it gets you away from IDFA and cookies, and we can really start to target on location and use AI to better understand stuff that's going on in different locations based on weather and other data sets. So there's a lot of different ways that we can start to apply AI to that side of the house as well.
Okay, very cool. So we've got two different areas here, and then Eric brings in a third area. Eric, what about you, and where are you using your new kind of AI ML focus?
So Zixi, as a software platform for transport and management of actually broadcast streaming and the aggregation of how those two things are coming together in the Venn diagram overlap, we've been in the sort of machine learning space with this since 2019 and looking at exciting things like estimated peak to signal noise ratios, EPNSR, and how do we optimize protocols within an AI fashion. And that has evolved over the past 3 years into an AI ML thing we have as our intelligent data platform, where we're looking to, if Michael wants to see how things are happening across his chain and Ethan needs to ensure that there's going to be optimization on the monetization, how do we ensure that there is a quality of service and ultimately a quality of experience that can be matched by that? And as this digital world continues to evolve, rights have created many more streams. So where once upon a time there was a very big broadcast infrastructure, in the virtualization and cloud adoption, what was once tens to hundreds is now thousands and tens of thousands of connections that all need to be managed and ensured, and not with an engineer per scenario or an eye on glass, but how do you allow humans to be a force multiplier in ensuring that the audience got what they expected?
Okay, so and that's a really great point, taking something and helping it along, put it that way. And whether it's in production, delivery, monetization, or transport, we've got a whole bunch of different use cases here, but there's still some very common things I think that happen. For any of you, and I'll let you grab whichever wants to speak to this first, if you weren't using this, what would happen to what you're actually doing within your own work? And Ethan looks like he wants to talk.
Always. So the direct answer to your question is I don't think anything happens. I think what ends up occurring though is that you have these kind of lower function jobs like transcription, like monitoring all these data connections, that type of stuff, that you now have to put humans on. And those humans are not doing those other tasks, those higher value tasks. So I think, that entry point around AI and ML is really kind of freeing up resources to really focus on the stuff that makes you money, not sort of those table stakes that kind of keep the engines running, right? And AI can say, hey, I have an issue over here. Why don't you send a human to come look at it? And that's great. And we're not saying it's not important. But I think what we're saying is hey, maybe not, we don't need 10 people watching monitors all day to make sure connections stay solid. We just need something to signal us, hey, come look at a connection. Or we need someone to say, hey, I didn't understand whether that's a comma or a period. Maybe you should take a listen to it, but the AI will do the rest of it.
Okay. I mean, with the volume of content that's going out now, is it even possible to use humans to monitor things? Mike?
No, I was going to say you'd be doing less, right? There's just no other way to state it. You wouldn't be able to handle the load that we have put on, we'll call it staff in general, wherever you are in the chain, because it's just the amount of content that's going out the door of most facilities these days is too much for the staff to handle without some, call it, robot helping them get down the road, so to speak.
Okay. And I mean, the same thing, Eric, must be with you, is that in terms of the ability to somebody to monitor or to look at things. I mean, with the volume of content that is now being delivered out into the market, is there any way that you can actually still handle that without using some form of automation and machine learning?
And I would say the short answer, to echo both Ethan and Michael, is no. It's not a scalable model. And you begin to try to marry very expensive and scarce resources in engineering that had traditionally looked at things. I mean, we have subject matter experts and certain in-house video geniuses who can very quickly look at a series of graphs and understand the correlation. But how does that become part of a operator's skill set and portfolio of the ways that they can have the tools necessary to manage not 10 and 100, but thousands of things, which is obviously beyond eyes on glass. And, we, the industry, are going to need to build out the tools that, as Michael said, sort of robot TV, but we're going to move towards autonomous aspects of workflow. But that's by taking the internal resources, human resources available, and giving them a force multiplier so that they can do 10x and 100x to what they would have done before.
Okay. And again, with the volume of content that is being demanded in the market, I don't think there's any other way to handle this. But, I'm going to jump around on the questions we have and not to confuse anybody, but, we see that it's important to use it in order to do things, but what's the biggest misconception you guys hear from either your customers, your colleagues, I mean, Eric, for you, what do you hear that's outright wrong?
Well, I think one of the bigger things is to, it's a big jump. I mean, I've watched the television industry morph with its streaming aspects and even the adoption of IP, which in itself means that suddenly there are many, many networks of complex topologies. But how does one demystify this process? You need to trust within the AI ML aspects of this. And I think that making it clear on how these tools work, what they're based on, how they actually manifest themselves in results is really important. I mean, one of the biggest hidden challenges in technical debts in the industry is root cause analysis. And an average program channel of content will spend $500,000 a year just trying to figure out what went wrong with the fiber, what went wrong with the server, et cetera, et cetera. And, television is a 100-year-old business, but for 60, 70, 80 years, we were running blind. I mean, the only way you even knew anything was good in a truck was you sent a signal to master control and bring back a net return to say, look, that's the picture that they got. That's not how this is going to work, especially Zixi is a live business. We do live streaming. So as the industry has morphed from a very video on demand file-based set of offerings, as you intersect with live sports and news and et cetera, there's no time to figure those things out. And the amount of content flowing, as you point out, is exponential. So you're going to need to have those correlations, the causalities presented to you in an actionable form.
So, but do your customers or even, like I said, your contacts, do they have any ideas that, you know, when you actually think about it, just don't resonate, that are inaccurate? And the reason I'm going to this place is because I think that there are some misconceptions that people have, but I wanted just to hear, you know, whether there's things that you've heard from.
Well, I have some people at
It's a
Discovery.
very good point. It's a very good point.
I'll let Eric finish.
No, go
Eric,
ahead.
was there anything else you wanted to say?
I'll give the tee up, Michael, and I'm sure you can say it. But as a person who speaks with customers like Discovery and other folks that we would all know as household names, the bucket of AIML is, well, is that Datadog or Services Now? Is this data visualization? Is it Watson? The answer is it's a very big ecosystem, and there are different things. We Zixi are really focusing in on video, but not an image recognition on that part. But how do you maintain the payload that is video in an AIML way? So I think that now we're getting into a lexicon that is starting to land in a much more specific way, and then taking this and translating it from an engineering point of view, an operations point of view, a technological architectural point of view, and then ultimately a business impact point of view. There's a lot of evangelism that's required of all of us to get to the common understanding around that. And I don't think that's clear.
Okay. All right. Let's just go over to Michael and just follow up on what you were about.
Well, I was going to say that I think of the way I think AI has led to some, like, it's intelligence, right? I think of ML, and I am not an ML scientist by any stretch, but I think of it as a grand pattern recognition machine, right? It looks at patterns, and then it says when they deviate from that, I can do something on that information. And far too often I'll deal with someone that will say, well, just, you know, you like, especially like transcription, which you think is a pretty solved, easy problem, but it's not. There's a lot of nuance in it. And you get into a space where someone just says, oh, we'll just throw the machine at it. And also, I think, doesn't realize that you're not totally going to save money in the end. So I think those two things are something to think about, right? You're probably speeding up, and you're definitely increasing capacity, but you're not probably going to reduce your costs overall by doing it. So I think the AI term, personally, it irritates me because there's not a lot of intelligence in what we're talking about here. There's often just a lot of machines throwing at things and learning about them and giving you back information. That might be a bit of a diss, and I don't mean it to take away from what people have built, because it is pretty amazing stuff, but it is, it's led to a bit of a misconception about it. So I don't know, I think I just triggered Ethan there, so I don't want to.
Nah, not too badly, I don't think. You know, but I think that, you know, when I talk to people about starting to apply AI into areas, you know, the first thing you run into is, hey, I'm going to have to fire a bunch of people to do it, which isn't true, right? Because, you know, as pointed out, you know, in this opening set of discussions, right, like there's just more to do. So if you can kind of get some of those low-hanging pieces of fruit off the plate, then you can kind of focus on some better things. And the other one is just, I don't think people know where to start. I think you have to look at kind of what you're doing foundationally and say, hey, this is an area that we can really focus in on, whether it's transcription or whether it's some, you know, QoE kind of stuff that Michael's doing with Zixi. There's a lot of great places to start, but it's not one size fits all. And I think that's something that sort of stops people a little bit, because you can't go to the shelf and just pull AI off and plug it in. You have to really think about what you're going to do and think about how to apply it.
Okay. So you mean I can't just take this and use my AI? You're trying to figure out what it is. It's a little speaker, actually. So
I thought it was a chocolate.
No, that's later. Okay, so Michael just brought up costs and costs savings, or I should say the opposite of. So what happens is you've got something, right? And someone says, this is a problem, I need to solve it. Usually where the uses of machine learning come in is when it's a very large problem that you don't have a method of solving it in a traditional way. I think that's kind of the safest way to say it. And so realistically, you're training a system with information to look for certain things. And in Zixi's case, you're training within the transfer side, within, and I just had a question come up, within Michael's case, it could be on the production side or the monetization side for Ethan. But realistically, if you're not getting cost savings, what kind of value are you seeing? Because now we started to talk about the fact that you can have people doing other things, but Ethan, for instance, are there things that you are having delivered that you would not, the value that you are creating that you could not create in another way?
I don't know whether it's from our perspective, I don't know if it's that you can create the value in another way, but to create that value in another way would be far more costly than applying AI to it. And I think you look at, the economies of scale that you're trying to go, and it's not just an OpEx CapEx discussion, but it's really about user experience, and then ultimately sort of on the advertising side, what the value of that is. So you go back to like the first example that I had, right, where like as far as weather goes, all I want to know is the pollen count, right? And all the rest of the stuff is just useful information to me, but pollen count to me is actionable. We can start to target that because now, the AI knows that that's of interest to me. So you can start to, send ads to me that are tailored to that. It also makes that experience better. So this way, when I go looking for weather, I'm going to go back to the place that has that information easy for me to find, making it simple and making my life better, right? Downstream of any AI that was applied, it makes my life better as an end user. So it goes back into the stack. It's the same as what Michael or Eric is doing at 60, where on that QoE, like if you can continue to deliver great streams of high quality, I'm not going to fall off of them. I'm not going to say, you know what, that stream is awful. I'm not going back to that anymore. I'm deleting that app because I know I'm going to get a consistent experience. And I think there's a lot of value in that. It's not value that hits a ledger anywhere, but it's value to the brand and to the end user.
Okay. But would you say that it's something you are able to create something with machine learning that you would not be able to create otherwise?
Oh, absolutely. And again, that goes into that, application of AI or machine learning into your particular foundation, right? And what you're looking to do with it. You can create, we've done some projects, where we were creating highlights with using AI, no humans involved, just creating highlights from different sporting events. We've done some stuff on the political side with presidential and congressional debates, where you're pulling out the highlights of the debates and sort of matching up the responses so they kind of make some sense and stuff along those lines. So there's a lot of value to be created there. Is there an audience for that, right? It's the next question you have to figure out, right? And then, obviously there's some ways to use AI to find the audience for that stuff you've just created. Probably not a great business model, but you can then start to use those AI learnings that you've got. So, sort of what Michael's doing with transcriptions at Discovery is the next step from that. It says, okay, so let's take those transcriptions, feed them back into a natural language understanding model, and then you can start to create derivatives of that programming. And start to serve up, some bite-sized pieces of programming that drive people back into, full content. So there's lots of different ways to start to apply that and create value from it.
Okay.
100%. Actually, we've done exactly what you just said. Like, we've gotten the transcription, you take it and you say, okay, what can I do with this to generate derivative 100%, right? And I mean, actually, someone just in the chat, I've triggered some people here, so apologies, but said augmented intelligence. And I 100% firmly believe that the value of it is actually in augmenting the staff you already have and having them not necessarily think less, but presenting them, it's like presenting them the data they need to get their job done faster. So there is, and one thing I will disagree with Ethan on is that there is some stuff that hits the ledger. You can look at it and say, I pumped this much content out the door. I fed this much data, content out the world. I made this much money, and I did it with the same staff. So there is something there for sure. I don't mean to diss on the intelligence word. It's more just the idea that I think there are people who don't understand what is actually going on, who think, oh, it's just a magical black box, and I don't have to think. And you do still have to treat it with some intelligence. It's not to overuse the term.
You gave me such a great lead into the next question. Now, the black box thing is such a common perception, I would say. And that's one of the things, you know, I think of is if I'm a customer and you tell me you're using this, you know, for one thing, it sounds a little jargony. And I'm like, well, what does this mean? But also the next thing that crosses my mind is, why should I believe you? Like, if you tell me that you're using this magical thing that is AI ML, you know, how can you back that up or substantiate it? Now, I mean, I'm going to pick on Eric, and I have another thing to talk to Eric about also that came up in the Q&A, but before we go there, so what happens, you know, if I'm a customer, why should I understand that this is important for me?
Well, I think, and I think it was very interesting to see Ethan, Michael, and the two comments pop in and about this idea of the black box. And this is kind of what I was referring to about the demystification, in that this is, not to get the touchy-feely thing, but this is a journey that we've all begun, and we know how it takes. IBM certainly understands generational models. Michael has lived and implemented them, but ultimately we will be hit with key performance indicators, KPIs of various things. In our world, I will be showing uptime, packet loss, not making sure that I lost an iframe for the ad and the Scuddy marker. Getting a little techie here, but how does that all flow through? Because those have the business outputs that Michael referred to. And I think that the first step is that we're working on getting the right probabilities around things and making correlations and looking in patterns that we didn't even know existed before, because we're covering data. Like Zixi pulls 3 billion telemetry points a day. We're introducing a new software instance that will make that 15 billion instances a day, and in 5-second increments. So we're getting towards near real time. This is area that hasn't been explored. And that is going to inform how you go from predictive to proscriptive, and ultimately towards this mythical journey of autonomous, that things can become self-healing. Whether my system is remaining up, an IBM system is saying which would be the optimal ad, and Discovery is serving its customers so that when you get to the end of a program, the next levels of program are perfectly curated. And I think that there will be metrics, as there always have been, across that entire range. But this is a global and industry investment of time, money, and technical expertise to achieve that goal. Okay,
so I get that you can prove to me that my iframe didn't get dropped, which is, you know, if I am looking at something to measure this by, I trust you. Okay, so now, Ethan, how do I trust your information? You know, what do I get to see that shows me that this is something that is real?
I mean, so on the advertising side of the house, it's higher CPM straight up. It's
okay.
If I'm selling it for 5, I apply a little AI. I'm selling it for 10. I'm doing well. On the weather side of the house, it's about engagement and about, you know, am I going back into that app, or is a user going back into that app 3, 4, 5 times, because we understand that user by applying AI to that experience and making sure that relevant information is the first thing that they see when they come into that app. And then you can start to marry the two of them together a little bit and then say, hey, if I'm getting what I like and I'm engaged higher, I'm worth more money to the company. So this way I can charge a higher CPM. And if we apply some AI on the ad side as well, and go into that predictive model. I don't think that we ever get proscriptive there, but I think certainly predictive we can get to. You know, that value then increases. So maybe it's now a $15 CPM instead of even a $10 CPM. So there's a real straight line to it.
Okay. All right. I trust both of you now. Now, Mike, you're in a slightly different position, but how do your internal customers trust you? How do you verify it?
Well, it depends on what it is, but often, I mean, we don't. Yeah, I guess I am in a different space here. Like we don't really deploy anything without doing some kind of experimentation and test on it, right? And so we'll look at it and work with our ops partners and the business, as I would call it in general, and say, hey, listen, we can do this, but let's actually do a little bit of test. So we kind of try to get out in front of it, and we've run tests. I mean, we've been doing what I call the closed caption train. I think now we're in our 4th year where we just do we bounce between providers. We look at all of it and try to get at as best we can. I mean, we have a legal requirement to be pretty accurate on that. So as soon as we can get, but it's often just, we do demos. I mean, I hate to say it, I'll go and say, hey, we did this, and we show it to any users or anybody who's interested and say, this is what we ended up doing. So it's a bit of a, I guess I would say internally, we treat it more of any kind of initial deployment of anything we haven't done before is usually done with what I would call an experimentation kind of mindset, right? We are not saying it's 100%. We go in and say, let's find out. And if it turns out to be 70%, great, because now we've got something that augments users, right? That's usually the bar we use. With
your transcription and with your titling, what's you said you've used a couple systems. Can you walk us through a little bit about that?
So I mean, yeah, we can for sure. So I think we started with on the Google side. Right now we use pretty much the Google video APIs, and we use the apologies to IBM. We use the Amazon ones. We bounce between them. For certain things, we are in the mode right now of some experimentation around logo detection. So looking actually at, I'm going to call it product placement without realizing you did product placement, for lack of a better way of putting it. All of it is generally, well, I'll just say the discovery pipeline relies on a whole lot of external services, right? We are all in the cloud, everything that goes through from ingest into the system all the way to play out, and I'll call that, D plus as in Discovery Plus, streaming play out is all in the cloud. So every asset, if there's a service out there that we can get access to, we'll just round trip it through it and get data back. And we have built internally a lot of very, I'm going to call it specific ways of storing time-based metadata, because it's all media at the end of the day. That any provider we use for data, whatever it might be, right? It's looking for blacks, or it's looking for text, or it's looking for logos, or whatever it is, it's going to come back with some kind of data representation. We store that in the same database. So if I'm doing a search, and this is one thing that we actually do quite a bit of, is if I'm looking for something and I get back spans of time from the library, I'm going to get back all of those. I can look at those spans and say it has this data stack on it, right? So I can see, yeah, it's got Guy Fieri in it, but it also has, Cuisinart in the background, right? So you can do searches to say, I'm looking for specifically that combo. So, now the next step for us for sure is the monetization side of it, which is a harder thing, and not probably a topic that it should be discussed, because we could spend the rest of the time talking about it. But it is like I said, a lot of what we do is the same rinse repeat. Let's experiment with something. If there's a new service out there, we'll always look for it. Like I said when we talked last week, one of the things we're trying to figure out is cigarette smoking for the Indian market, because it's against the regulations there, but nobody else has that regulation. So it's like, we have no idea if it's there. And instead of having someone look through every piece of media that goes to air, let's see if we can find it. Now, it's frankly kind of turned out to be a bit impossible, but what are you gonna do?
Okay. All right. So we're I now trust you all. Okay. So you've proven to me that there are ways that I can understand that this is working, even if we say that it is something that is learning based on information that I may not know what that information is. That still makes me a little uncomfortable, but I'll have to give it the benefit of the doubt. Now, Eric, so for you, if I'm one of your customers, what are some of the other questions you want me to ask of you as to how you are using this new approach to things?
Well, when we go into our discovery, and I think it's interesting what Michael said about how, and I know Discovery for many years, they're very good at getting in front, going to the market. So we work very closely with our entire customer base to try to attack the problem sets that are, to use the industry jargon, a lot of pain point. But within that, it's what you said, that the thing that you don't trust is the thing we're trying to actually solve for. We're looking to find correlations and patterns that if I pulled up one of our top engineers, they could look through a set of data and say, well, this means this and this correlated to that, and this is why this happened. how do you do that at scale, and how do you bring those things up so that people can have, one, extreme data visualization, two, look at things in multiple dimensions that you would be impossible to look at. We pull 100 different, data set types that we're trying to just harvest and bring together. And while we're solving our world in this larger, bigger ecosystem, I think you can hear the diatribe. So we, one, want to solve today's problems of how do I have broadcast streaming and video in general maintain a certain level of quality. But beyond that, how do those things intersect with more future setting monetization and cost goals of any organization? And I think it is a journey. And Ethan stated, predictive versus prescriptive versus autonomous. I completely understand in the sense, but you're going to have the idea that someone's watching a piece of programming and they're going to do what television doesn't like, change the channel, which today is not how that exactly works. But how does one maintain that audience interaction through the varieties of programming available? You're going to have data available that tells you what that person is, what their demographic is. I mean, Nielsen ratings ran the television industry forever. I know that the Weather Channel and other things has, looked at much more smaller market segments that would break the United States into much tinier areas. How does Discovery or any other client find that I can say, I know what your weather is, I know what your sports were, and by the way, it's Shark Week. And all of that has to come together to make a compelling video experience. And I think that when we talk to our clients, we accept that this is an ongoing work in process. ANIML is not, as you held up your little speaker, this mythical black box and waves pixie dust on it and it goes away. It's an ongoing evolution of what the technology that was available is now being applied into the media and entertainment space.
Okay. Now, I have a question that just came up, and in fact, I'm going to answer the question in a second. But Eric, for you and for your customers, when you talk about the ability to see potential errors, is that something that you want to talk to them about in terms of right now you are transporting a huge amount of data and information, but the anomalies that come up, the things that you don't expect, is that the area that you want your customers to come and say to you, can you tell me what my potential, I won't even say failure rate, but error rate might be? Or what are the...
It is absolutely true. And so we use currently 4 anomaly detection models, 2 classifier models. We put these together because it's not like people don't know errors exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it wasn't easy to actually harvest that data, let alone make sense of it. So the goal now is to begin the monitoring and the mapping and to pull those things together in a way that they are actionable, or at least they're understandable. And as we talk about this ongoing arms race of how people are streaming and platforms and things, you've got a finite set of content sources, sort of, but those are growing. And then you have an unbelievably growing level of distribution outlets and consumption points. How do you make sure that you understand what's going on in that very now complex and hyperscale level of supply chain? Okay. And I think the truth of the matter is we moved from a 4.9 sort of model in general. And if you think about your television, you didn't mind, or satellite, or whatever that meant, the expectation in streaming is no longer, oh, I'll have buffering and macro blocking. It's, I want a perfect 4K signal all the time. So that is the table stakes to start the game. And then you can get elegant with Discovery and IBM as to what you do with that.
Okay. So I mean, essentially what you're saying is that for your customers, you have the ability to analyze what's coming in and say, these are the potential errors that you might get.
Yeah, you're getting into the part where, okay, I had to make a signal. It has to be encoded. It has to go across an on-premise or a public cloud or a private cloud. It's going to be received to a CDN or maybe to a cable head end or any number of places. It's a live event. It has to be spun up and spun down, not measured in 100, but 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 events. This is an enormous task. So in order to ensure so we talked a little bit about iframes, but if I lose programming, that's not great, but that's one thing. If I lose an ad in the old days, we used to record as an industry every single advertisement. And if you missed that ad, you had to do a makeup, you had to do the as run recording and then do the make good on what that meant. There's billions and billions of dollars at stake at this. So having an intelligent highway that can connect all of that is critical, or else it's going to be very difficult to achieve.
Okay, I'm going to jump to one of the questions here, and we have someone who's asked about, are any of you applying AI to archives to bring your old content to the forefront for streaming? So I would say this is more of a Michael question.
It is, I think. I mean, I can answer it very quickly. If you look at Discovery Plus, there's something like 72,000 assets. We plumbed we dumpster dove for a lot of that stuff, I'll be honest, and brought back some Christopher Lowell from the 90s and other things. So yeah, we're, in terms of looking for it, I can't say that AI was involved in looking at it and saying, hey, would this be popular? There's some predictive stuff of saying, hey, well, this was popular on the service, we should go back and find some other stuff, but it's sort of association stuff. But all the analysis I'm talking, we've done on the full library through and through.
But Michael, how are people finding that buried content, right? Because
So
there's 70,000 titles is really hard to scroll through.
Yeah, actually, that gets back to what you were talking about. So there's a bit of this is sort of in its infancy, and I don't want to oversell what we did, but we basically looked at descriptions and we looked at what the content was. When you have a library as big as Discovery, we've been around for a long time, well before I was there, and there's a lot of disparate types of content that, I mean, TLC, the channel, has gone through sort of 3 incarnations of what it is and what the type of content that's there. And now some of the content that was, it was on that channel in the early aughts is not going to air on that. It would be on HGTV. So we're looking at descriptions and actually doing a bit of natural language on it and saying, hey, this is kind of the same content, right? Because we don't even have the people around who produced it. We just simply, the only thing we really have is the original assets and the ability to distribute it. So it's a lot of that kind of thing. It all kind of grew out of I'll call it a hackathon effort, which sort of built word clouds off of what was in the description. And that is a way of sort of building things, right? Because the thing that we found, and I don't know if Eric or Ethan would agree with this, that a lot of times giving users the ability to sort of investigate the data that was created has led to like, hey, that's a really good thing. So it has helped us prioritize. That's the second question I think is coming up, at least for us. There's a lot to do. So you go, well, okay, let's just follow what the data our users want, and we'll go from there. I imagine actually, Eric, you're probably doing the same thing. You're looking at streaming stuff and you go, this is what's important for triggers. Like, just follow what your users want. I don't know if you'd agree with it.
I completely agree. And the answer that I would have to that question is we really have to understand what you're looking to get out of that archive. Is it really long tail? Is it really protecting copyrights within it? There's a lot of different variables that go into that. And I think once you understand what the end goal is, you can go backwards and say, okay, so here's a way to apply AI to achieve that goal, right? Because from our perspective at IBM, we want you to be successful as a publisher. We want to understand your KPI that you're measuring on, and we'll help you hit that KPI. But we're not going to come off the shelf and say, hey, here's some great AI to use and you're going to make tons of money on it without knowing anything about your business.
So I think one of the things that we're experiencing is, like some of the other parts of the streaming world, we have this terminology, this machine learning, artificial intelligence. And I think what it is that you each are in different areas. You're each doing different things. The question came up as to how to identify where to use this. And in some ways, this is the same way to identify any business/engineering problem is where's the biggest need and how will this solve the need? Is there anything that any of you want to mention as to how you decided to go into the particular area you went into with your technology and AI?
I'll start first, I guess. Actually,
okay.
For us, it was pretty simple. We we were throwing people at problem. Like there's no amount of misery that you can inflict on people. And we were like, well, they're not happy. Let's find a way to make them happier. So you got them out of some of the more, what is, as Ethan said, some of those, you know, the lesser skilled jobs that we were paying people that were far more skilled to do. And you go, wait, let's stop, right? I have this sort of mantra of like, get non-creative tasks out of the business, like just kill them, like, you know, as quick as you can. So that's the tack we took. I can't say every single one of those has been, you know, a complete success, but you just look at things and you go, no, we're spending too much money doing this particular task. So it's been about cost, I guess, for us.
Okay. I mean, I would say that it's the same way you make any technology choice. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, I guess so. I don't really, because I don't think we've ever, this is going to sound really bad, but we haven't given it that much thought. You just look at it and you go, well, that might possibly solve the problem. And you do a little investigation and you say, yep, it does solve the problem enough. And then you really try to build it out, at least on our side.
All right. Now, you know, again, this is something where each of you in certain areas is generating so much data that there's no other way to handle this, essentially, because it would not scale, put it that way. And you know, one of the things then that I think of is how do you join your systems together? Now, Ethan and I were chatting and he mentioned it's an API world. How does the information travel from Michael to Ethan to Eric? And you know, because if you're creating this intelligence within your own organization, within a certain part of the workflow, how does this intelligence get shared? And I'll just throw it open.
So it starts at the API, right? And,
Okay.
and after we spoke, I dug out, and to the best I could tell, it was Jeff Lawson from Twilio who came up with API economy. If someone's listening and has a better point of reference than that, that's fine.
Okay,
Let me know. It goes back to 2006. But it ultimately becomes that because, you know, Michael's team, right? There's someone sitting in ad ops. There's someone sitting, you know, in, you know, some, you know, creating a show rundown or producing a show, putting something together. There's someone sitting in a tape archive area. They all kind of have different interfaces and different ways to interface with data. It all has to get visualized for them in some way. And that's where the APIs come into play, right? So Michael's moving data into, you know, not IBM, but to those other AI providers that he mentioned. And he's getting data back from them and sucking it into his asset management platform and then pushing out the relevant data to the stakeholders that he needs to. And it's all through APIs. And that's sort of the building block. And I'm sure Eric at Zixi, you know, I know some of my customers use Zixi. And again, it's all API driven. Hey, we're going to feed this out. We're going to get a bunch of data back via our APIs, and we're going to know what's going on. And that's the way this economy is built.
Yeah, I'm going to dive on that because I'll go back in the Wayback Machine. 10 years ago, in my early days at Zixi, we were having a meeting with a CBS executive, which we can say at this moment. And the quote was, "You're only as good as your API." And it's an interesting statement since basically television industry took a little while to figure all that out. And as Ethan is laying it out, and I know Michael has to buy and manage all of this, this API ecosystem is incredibly diverse. I mean, it ranges from the starting device and the source to the APIs and the machines to the APIs of the other systems you touch along the journey. And there are APIs at a platform level, APIs at a user interface level, and all of that has to be shared. But you are getting into data transfer. And if there's one thing, I think that data structure, live stream data, and the marrying of that to what makes it television, which is an audio video essence with metadata, that's what we're kind of going through right now. And I think that is a very important part of our industrial evolution here. And it's just, you know, you got things like Kafka, et cetera, but I think the structures are getting in there. We're working out from the MAM world, you would have been into our ontology and taxonomy and how do I hierarch this whole thing. But now you're trying to introduce live and you're trying to maintain systems that will spin up and down around an event or around a playlist. Like it's not just as simple. What was once a simple file and you went in and looked and said, play that for me. You're now going to be curating this in a living, breathing, self-healing set of systems. So I'll go back to the API is most important, but we are fortunately, what the bigger issue will be marrying the data across all of the impacts that the three of us are sort of describing.
So, I mean, I hate to say this, but would it be too much to ask us to have open source intelligence that gets transferred between the different systems? Because what I'm asking is not necessarily how data gets transferred between the different systems, but how we are classifying the knowledge that comes out of a machine learning and artificial intelligence.
I think you'll see standards around it. I mean, that's
Okay.
kind of like you have this is a standards-based process, so people have a set of rules of how they approach it.
So,
Yeah,
okay, if we see standards, who's creating these standards?
Oh, that's a religious war.
You want to you take this, Michael? You know.
I know. Actually, I think it will be people like us. I mean, we're just like, we have no skin in the game what that interface is, right? And I would agree. Actually, I wasn't thinking about the API side of it. That is true, right? Like when we started Discovery, there's a command line. We're not talking ML there, but there's a command line thing. Let's write an API around it, and then you can automate it, right? And it started in the automation side, I think, a lot of that API talk, and it's become more. And the more robust your API is, the more likely I'm willing to purchase it. The better the data, and the less work I have to do to integrate with it, the more interested I am in purchasing it. So just from a pure product standpoint or a cost standpoint, it makes sense. And I do think that you'll see the industry itself, like we don't have any, I'm not going to turn around and try to sell my time code metadata database structure and the APIs to use it. But I'm very willing, like, I'm not in that business. I mean, if I was, then I'd be like, no, that's my IP. I don't want to sell it, but I'm not. So I'm very willing just to say to any other broadcaster, listen, this worked for us. Look at it. If you want to use it, great, right? We've already done that to some degree. Some of it actually gets patented, and then we're like, why are we patenting this? But whatever, it doesn't matter. So I think that's the goal. And I totally think that if we had some standards, we'd probably be better off. The problem is that you'd have to get a bunch of manufacturers that are highly competitive in the same room and agree to that. And I don't think that would happen. Having been on the manufacturer side, I've been in the other side of the conversation and go, well, what's the benefit to me? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't, we all have to, they're in business. They have to kind of make decisions independent of that.
Okay. Ethan,
I'm
any
going to say,
thoughts?
Michael, I just want to I'm going to challenge Ed as a longtime vendor, and you and I know the background, but I would just say this. In the cloud virtualized world, and as you really move to IP, I think it's an important competitive advantage to be interoperable, where before there was economic interest in doing that, and that is much harder to justify, let alone action today. And I think you'll see SMPTE, you'll see people, and all of those folks come in. There's RIST, there's all kinds of stuff out there that figures these things out as a standard. But it's really, our industry has always functioned on interoperability, which 10 and 15 years ago, we know was very difficult and now is expected.
Right. No, I shouldn't. I mean, I always go back to, like, the days where you're like, well, you always had an HDSDI cable, right? You could always drop it in terms of video. You could always drop to that and it would work, right? Well, let's be fair. That HDSDI is an API. That's the fundamentals of it. You could plug it in and it would just automatically work. Now, it's not technically an API, obviously, but the user experience and the customer experience was as good. So I don't mean to be sort of inflammatory with my comments, but I do agree with what you're saying. I think the problem is that it is hard to get any standardization on APIs. Because a lot of times actually it doesn't make sense. That, like, well, if you've got some
I think, don't you think, sorry to
work.
interrupt, but don't you think that it's sort of to me existential, because you're the consumer. And if we, the vendors, don't provide you with that kind of common denominator of interoperability that includes data plus video plus whatever else you want to do, how are we even in the mix? That's
right.
But hang on. But Michael's not the actual consumer. Michael is our consumer, Eric. But there's a whole universe of users who are the consumers. And those are the people that we have to think about as vendors, and as Michael has to do as a publisher. Because that's where
understood. I'm a business to business guy. I got it.
But that's where standards will come from, though, right? Because, hey, I'm going to watch, Food Network on Pluto, but I'm going to watch, some other Discovery thing on my cable VOD, and I'm only going to watch, another Discovery channel online. That experience has to be the same across the board, and that's where interoperability comes from. And it's driven from me sitting at home. Not from us as vendors, not from Michael as a publisher, but from what the expectation is from the audience.
Yeah, no, Ethan's absolutely right. It is, that's the ultimate. I mean, I'm a middleman, right? Like, to be disrespectful, I buy something and I turn around and I go, does it work for my viewer?
And we're a wholesaler to the middleman. So
Right. I mean,
Exactly right.
Okay, so we've got the whole sales chain here. And I guess what I'm going to take away from this is that we need certain standards around this, because otherwise things aren't going to work within the workflow. The way you guys went and decided what to use this approach for was based on a business need. And in Eric's case, it was to give customers the ability to look into their transport. In Michael's case, it was to automate some of the production part. In Ethan's case, it was to match the needs of the consumer with also some of the needs of the advertiser. So we've got a lot of solid use cases here. It sounds like there is obviously a lot of things we're going to continue to do in this area. Now, for people who've been asking questions that we haven't gotten to, hopefully we will get to them offline. But the only other thing I'm going to wrap up with is, for you guys, you each have a minute. And is there any other question that you want answered in that 1 minute we have left that we haven't yet got to? You're speechless.
No, I mean, I fear I've come across as not a fan, and I've spent a whole lot of money on ML in the last couple of years. Like, maybe my personality is one of a realist. Like, I definitely think everybody should jump in and go, hey, listen, this is going to help you. But do it with open eyes and go, hey, I know don't think of it as a black box. Learn about what you're getting out of the data, because then you'll know how to leverage off of it. So, but no, I don't just definitely use it. There's a whole lot of richness in what ML brings to the table.
What
Ethan?
I would say is that, especially for publishers who are listening to this, you guys sit on this mountain of first-party data that is so valuable. And anything you can do to unlock that value will help your business. And AI or ML even, is a great way to start to match patterns and start to understand and get that next layer down that you're not getting from Nielsen overnights, that you're not getting from ComScore or something like that, about, hey, here's what our users expect, here's what they're doing, and here's how we can be better, and then start to solve those problems.
I think you just created the topic for one of our next panels at the real conference location. Eric, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, and I think you both Michael and Ethan did a great job of teeing that up. I would echo Michael by saying we're using it, we're doing it, but it's a process and a journey. It's not a black box, and it's going to take some generational pieces. I think what Ethan was talking about, particularly just this idea of the API and the interaction, 3 seemingly separate silos, this is going to come together in a very common Venn diagram. And the challenge is, one, to each of us kind of figure out what we're trying to solve at the moment, and it seems separate, but over time, these are going to become very intricately interconnected. And I think because that's how the industry will be able to solve for the ultimate consumer, which is the audience.
Okay. And obviously you're all trying to get video out to the consumer. So at one point, Eric has come back on. We have to leave this. Thank you all for joining us for this very interesting conversation. Eric, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Nadine, for doing such a great job of keeping everyone in line or letting them color outside the lines, whatever it is good moderators do. Seriously, that was really good. Thanks to our audience for joining us. Thanks to Bird Dog, Harmonic, and Zixi for sponsoring. The winner of the Amazon gift card for this hour is Einar Vagmo from Oslo, Norway. Congrats, and look out for an email from us about that. Join us again in about 30 minutes when we've got discussions about super aggregation and a little bit more about how AI is changing the world of OTT. Thanks so much.